I still remember the faces, every single one of them. Even now, at 101 years old, I can close my eyes and see them as clearly as I saw them on that morning in France, back in 1944. The morning when everything changed. The morning when I became the only man left standing from my entire platoon. My name is James Callahan. Most folks called me Jack. I was born in the spring of 1923 in a small town called Millbrook, just outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My father worked at the steel mill, same as his father before him. My mother raised 5 children in a 2-bedroom house that always smelled of fresh bread and coal dust. We didn't have much, but we had each other. And back then, that was enough. I was 18 years old when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. I remember exactly where I was standing when I heard the news on the radio. I was in Murphy's General Store picking up flour for my mother. Old man Murphy turned up the volume, and everyone in that store went silent. The kind of silence that settles into your bones. 3 days later, I enlisted. Now, before I continue with my story, I want to ask you something. If you find value in hearing the experiences of someone who lived through history, if these stories matter to you, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. These memories, they deserve to be heard. They deserve to be remembered. And your support helps make that possible. So please like and subscribe, and let's continue this journey together. My mother cried for 3 days straight when I told her. My father, he didn't say much. He just put his hand on my shoulder, looked me in the eyes and said, "You come back to us, son. You hear me? You come back." I promised him I would. It was the first promise I ever made that I wasn't sure I could keep. Basic training was at Camp Wheeler, down in Georgia. I'd never been south of the Mason-Dixon line before. The heat was something else entirely. We trained from dawn until well past dusk, running drills, learning to shoot, learning to fight, learning to survive. They broke us down and built us back up, turning farm boys and factory workers into soldiers. That's where I met the men who would become my brothers, not by blood, but by something even stronger, something forged in sweat and exhaustion and shared suffering. There was Thomas "Tommy" O'Brien, a red-headed kid from Boston with a laugh that could fill a room. He had freckles covering every inch of his face and hands that were always moving, always gesturing when he talked. Tommy wanted to be a writer when the war was over. He carried a small notebook everywhere he went, scribbling down observations, phrases, bits of conversation. He said he was going to write the great American novel someday. He was 20 years old. Then there was William "Billy" Santos from San Antonio, Texas. Billy was quiet, thoughtful. He had these deep brown eyes that seemed to see right through you. His father was Mexican, his mother was Irish, and Billy used to joke that he got the temper from both sides. He had a girl back home named Rosa. He'd shown me her picture so many times that I felt like I knew her myself. They were going to get married after the war. Billy had already bought the ring. He kept it in a small leather pouch, tucked against his chest at all times. He was 22. There was Henry "Hank" Cooper from Chicago. Hank was the oldest of us at 28, and we all looked up to him like a big brother. He'd been a boxer before the war, had even fought professionally for a few years. His nose had been broken so many times it sat crooked on his face, but he wore it like a badge of honor. Hank had a wife and 2 little girls back home. He kept their drawings in his helmet, said they brought him luck. And there was Samuel "Sammy" Washington from Harlem, New York. Now, in those days, the army was segregated, but somehow, through some bureaucratic mistake or act of fate, Sammy ended up assigned to our unit during training. Some of the men gave him trouble at first. Not us, not our group. Tommy had grown up in a mixed neighborhood in Boston. Billy knew what it was like to be looked at differently because of where his family came from. And me, well, my father always taught me that a man's character was the only thing that mattered. Sammy was the best soldier among us, calm under pressure, sharp as a tack, and loyal to his core. He could field-strip a rifle faster than anyone I'd ever seen, and he had a singing voice that could bring tears to your eyes. Sunday mornings before inspection, he'd sing hymns that his grandmother had taught him. Even the tough guys would stop and listen. We went through training together, shipped out together, landed in England together, and when D-Day came, we hit the beaches of Normandy together. June 6th, 1944. I've tried to describe that day to people over the years, but words never seem adequate. The sound of it, that's what I remember most. The chaos of it, artillery shells screaming overhead, the rattle of machine gun fire, men shouting, praying, crying. The waves crashing against the landing craft, and then the ramp dropping down, and suddenly you're running through water that's red with blood, stepping over bodies of men who were alive just seconds before. We made it off the beach. Not all of us from the landing craft, but our group. Tommy and Billy and Hank and Sammy and me, we made it. We fought our way through the hedgerows of Normandy, through villages whose names I can barely pronounce, through fields and forests and burned-out towns. What changes you? There's no way around it. The things you see, the things you have to do, they leave marks on your soul that never fully heal. But having those men beside me, knowing they had my back and I had theirs, that's what kept me going. That's what kept all of us going. By late autumn of '44, we'd pushed deep into France. The Germans were on the retreat, but they weren't giving up easily. Every mile we gained was paid for in blood. We'd lost men along the way. Good men. Men whose names I still remember, and whose faces still visit me in my dreams. But the 5 of us, the original 5 from Camp Wheeler, we were still together. We joked that we were lucky, charmed. Hank said it was his daughter's drawings protecting us. Tommy said it was his Irish luck. Sammy just smiled and said the good Lord wasn't finished with us yet. Then came December. We were stationed near a small village in the Ardennes forest, right on the border between Belgium and Luxembourg. It was beautiful country, all rolling hills and dense woods covered in snow, the kind of place that would have been peaceful if it weren't for the war. We'd been told to hold our position, that the Germans were beaten, that the war would be over by Christmas. They were wrong. December 16th started like any other day, cold, bone-achingly cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your muscles and makes every movement painful. We were dug in along a ridge overlooking a valley, our foxholes covered with whatever we could find to keep out the wind and snow. I was sharing a foxhole with Tommy. We'd been up most of the night on watch rotation, and we were both exhausted. Tommy was writing in his notebook by the dim light of a small candle, scribbling away like he always did. "What are you writing about now?" I asked him. He looked up and grinned. "The cold. I'm trying to find the words for it. How it feels. How it smells. How it sounds when the snow crunches under your boots." "Sounds like you're writing a weather report," I said. He laughed, that big, room-filling laugh of his. "It's all material, Jack. Everything is material. When I write my novel, people are going to feel like they were right here with us." "I hope not," I said. "I wouldn't wish this on anyone." Tommy's expression softened. "That's exactly why it needs to be written, so people understand, so they remember." I was about to respond when we heard it. A low rumble in the distance. At first I thought it was thunder, but it was too consistent, too rhythmic, and then the shells started falling. The Germans had launched a massive offensive, the Battle of the Bulge, they called it later. Over 200,000 German soldiers, supported by tanks and artillery, smashing through American lines across a 75-mile front. They caught us completely by surprise. The next few hours were chaos. Artillery shells rained down on our position, turning the snow-covered forest into a hellscape of fire and smoke and shattered trees. We could hear German tanks in the valley below, their engines roaring as they pushed through our lines. We fought back. Of course we fought back. That's what soldiers do. But we were outnumbered and outgunned, and our lines were crumbling. Word came down to fall back, to regroup at a rally point 2 miles to the west. The five of us, along with a dozen other men from our company, started moving through the forest. The snow was deep, the visibility poor. German shells were still falling all around us, and we could hear small arms fire in every direction. It was impossible to know where the enemy was, where our own forces were, where safety lay. Hank took point. He always took point, said his boxing instincts helped him sense danger before it arrived. Billy was behind him, then Sammy, then me, then Tommy bringing up the rear. We moved in single file, staying low, weapons ready. We'd gone maybe half a mile when we came to a clearing. It was about 50 yards across, the trees opening up into a natural amphitheater of snow-covered ground. On the far side, we could see the forest continuing, promising cover and concealment. Hank held up his fist, signaling us to stop. He scanned the tree line, looking for threats. Everything seemed quiet. The artillery had shifted to another sector, and for a moment there was an eerie calm. "Looks clear," Hank said quietly. "We'll cross in teams of 3. Move fast, stay low." The first team crossed without incident, then the second. Then it was our turn. Hank, Billy and I sprinted across the clearing while Tommy and Sammy and the rest of the men provided cover. We made it to the tree line. I turned back to wave the others forward. That's when the world exploded. The Germans had set up an ambush, machine gun nests hidden in the trees, mortar positions zeroed in on the clearing. They'd waited until we were split, until half of us were in the open with no cover. The sound was deafening. The chatter of machine guns, the thump of mortars, the screams of men being torn apart. I watched in horror as Tommy, my friend, my brother, took a burst of machine gun fire that spun him around and dropped him face first into the snow. I screamed his name. I tried to run back to him, but Hank grabbed me, pulled me down. "You can't help him, Jack. You go out there, you die too." I fought against him, but he was too strong. We were pinned down, bullets shredding the trees above our heads, and all I could do was watch as the men in that clearing one by one fell. Sammy. I saw Sammy try to drag one of the wounded men to cover. He got maybe 10 feet before a mortar round landed right next to him. The explosion threw him into the air like a rag doll. He didn't get up. The firefight lasted maybe 3 minutes. It felt like hours. When it was over, when the German guns finally fell silent, there was nothing but smoke and the moans of the dying. Hank, Billy and I were the only ones left from our side of the clearing. We waited, not moving, barely breathing, as German soldiers emerged from the trees to check the bodies of the fallen. They were thorough, efficient. A single shot rang out each time they found someone still alive. One of them came toward Tommy, my friend who wanted to write novels. The German soldier bent down, checked for a pulse, and then stood up and moved on without firing. Tommy was already gone. I pressed my face into the snow and wept silently. I wept for Tommy and his unwritten stories. I wept for Sammy and his Sunday hymns. I wept for all the men lying out there in the cold, their blood staining the white ground red. Eventually, the Germans moved on. They were pushing west, chasing our retreating forces, and they didn't have time to secure every inch of ground. We waited until long after the sounds of their advance had faded, and then we crawled out of our hiding place. We had to cross that clearing. There was no other way forward. Hank went first. His face was like stone, all the warmth and humor I'd known in him buried under a mask of grief and determination. Billy followed, clutching the leather pouch with Rosa's ring against his chest, his lips moving in silent prayer. I stopped at Tommy's body. His notebook was lying in the snow beside him, the pages wet with blood and melting ice. I picked it up. I couldn't leave it behind. It was all that was left of him, all those observations and phrases and bits of conversation that he was going to turn into the great American novel. Sammy lay nearby. His eyes were open, staring up at the grey sky. I knelt beside him and closed them gently. "I'm sorry," I whispered. I'm so sorry. We kept moving. We had to. The war didn't stop for grief. We linked up with other survivors, fell back to new defensive positions, and somehow, against all odds, we held the line. The Battle of the Bulge lasted for 6 weeks. It was the bloodiest battle American forces fought in the entire war. Nearly 20,000 American soldiers were killed, almost 50,000 wounded. And somehow, inexplicably, impossibly, I survived, but not without paying a price. 3 days after the ambush, we were assigned to help hold a crossroads near a village called Chenogne. The fighting was brutal, hand to hand in some places, and our forces were barely holding on. Hank was leading a counterattack on a German position when a sniper's bullet caught him in the chest. He went down without a sound, and when I reached him, he was already struggling to breathe. "My girls," he gasped, clutching my arm. "Tell my girls their daddy loved them. Tell them." He never finished the sentence. I pulled the drawings from his helmet, the crayon pictures of a house and a son in stick figures holding hands. I promised him I would deliver them myself, and I kept that promise when I got home, though it was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. By New Year's, Billy and I were the only ones left from our original group of 5. We didn't talk much anymore. There wasn't much to say. We just kept fighting, kept surviving, though neither of us could have told you why. On January 7th, our unit was ordered to take a fortified farmhouse that the Germans were using as a command post. It was a bloody assault, door to door, room to room. Billy was first through one of the windows on the upper floor. I heard the grenade bounce before I heard it explode. The blast blew out the wall and threw me backward down the stairs. When I came to, my ears were ringing, and my vision was blurred, and Billy was lying in a pile of rubble, his legs twisted at impossible angles. He was still alive when I reached him. Barely. "Rosa," he whispered, his voice so faint I could barely hear it. Tell her I'm sorry I couldn't." He pressed the leather pouch into my hand. The ring. Rosa's ring. I held him as he died. Held him and cried and cursed God and the war and everything that had brought us to this place. And then I was alone. The sole survivor from a group of 5 men who had gone through basic training together, who had landed on the beaches of Normandy together, who had sworn to look out for each other until the end. They were all gone. All of them. And I was still here. I've spent 80 years asking myself why. Why me? Why did I survive when so many others, so many better men didn't? I wasn't braver than Tommy or smarter than Billy or stronger than Hank or more capable than Sammy. I was just a kid from Pennsylvania who happened to be standing in a slightly different spot when the bullets came. For a long time, I couldn't find any meaning in it. I came home from the war broken in ways that didn't show on the outside. Shell shock, they called it then. Post-traumatic stress, they call it now. I had nightmares every night. I couldn't hear a car backfire without diving for cover. I couldn't look at snow without seeing blood. I delivered the drawings to Hank's wife. She collapsed in my arms and wept, and I wept with her. Their daughters, little girls of 5 and 7, stared at me with wide, confused eyes, not understanding why their daddy wasn't coming home. I found Rosa in San Antonio. She was beautiful, just like her picture. When I handed her the ring, she crumpled like a flower in frost. I told her everything. About Billy, about how much he loved her, about how her name was the last word on his lips. She thanked me through her tears, and I've never felt more inadequate in my life. I tried to find Tommy's family, to return his notebook. His parents had moved, the war had scattered everyone, and it took me nearly 2 years to track them down. When I finally handed his mother that blood-stained book, she held it like it was made of gold. "He always said he was going to be a writer," she said. "He was a writer," I told her. "He was a wonderful writer." I searched for Sammy's family too. I went to Harlem, knocked on doors, asked questions. His grandmother was still alive, a tiny woman with the same warm eyes as her grandson. When I told her about him, about his courage, about his singing, about how much he meant to all of us, she just smiled. "He always did have a good voice," she said. "He got that from his grandfather." She invited me in for tea, and we sat together for hours. Two people connected by love for a man who wasn't coming back. It took me a long time to start living again. Years. I worked at the steel mill like my father, married a wonderful woman named Margaret who understood my silences and held me when the nightmares came. We had 3 children and 7 grandchildren, and now 11 great-grandchildren. I never forgot my friends, not for a single day. Every year on December 16th, I light 5 candles. One for Tommy, one for Billy, one for Hank, one for Sammy, and one for all the other men who fell in that forest. I sit in the dark and I remember them. Their faces, their voices, their dreams that never came true. Tommy never wrote his novel, so I wrote it for him. It took me 20 years, writing in the early mornings before work, but I finished it. Published it under his name. It wasn't the great American novel he dreamed of, but it was something. A piece of him, still alive in the world. Billy and Rosa never got married, but Rosa did eventually find love again. She married a good man, had 4 children, and lived a full life. She sent me Christmas cards every year until she passed away in 2003. She always signed them, "With gratitude, Rosa." Hank's daughters grew up strong and beautiful, just like their father would have wanted. The oldest became a doctor. The youngest became a teacher. They've never forgotten the father who loved them so much. He carried their drawings into battle, and Sammy's grandmother kept his memory alive in Harlem, talking about him to anyone who would listen, making sure people knew that her grandson died a hero, fighting for a country that didn't always treat him right. I've lived 101 years. I've seen the world change in ways I never could have imagined. I've watched men walk on the moon, watched walls come down, watched technology transform everything I ever knew. But some things never change. The bonds we form with the people who matter. The love that survives even death. The memories that shape who we are. I still have nightmares sometimes. I still wake up reaching for a rifle that isn't there, still hear the chatter of machine guns in the distance. But the nightmares are different now. In them, I don't just see my friends dying. I see them living. I see Tommy scribbling in his notebook. I see Billy smiling at Rosa's picture. I see Hank shadowboxing in the barracks. I see Sammy singing hymns in the Sunday morning light. They're not gone. Not really. They live on in me, in the stories I tell, in the people whose lives they touched, however briefly. I used to wonder why I survived. Why me out of all of us? And I finally made peace with the fact that I'll never know the answer. What I do know is that survival comes with a responsibility, a duty to honor those who didn't make it, to remember them, to tell their stories. That's why I'm telling you this now. That's why I'm sharing these memories, even though some of them still hurt so much I can barely breathe when I think about them. Because Tommy and Billy and Hank and Sammy, they deserve to live. They deserve to come home, to fulfill their dreams, to grow old surrounded by people who loved them. And since they can't tell their own stories, I have to tell them for them. War is not glory. War is not adventure. War is young men dying in the snow, calling out for their mothers, clutching pictures of the people they'll never see again. War is survivors carrying the weight of the fallen for the rest of their lives. But war is also brotherhood. War is discovering what you're made of. War is holding on to hope when everything around you is darkness and despair. I survived the attack that killed everyone around me. I survived the Battle of the Bulge. I survived the war, and I've spent the last 80 years trying to live a life worthy of that survival. A life that honors the men who gave everything. In my study at home, I have a shelf with their photographs. Tommy with his red hair and freckled face, Billy with his thoughtful eyes, Hank with his crooked nose and boxer's build, Sammy with his warm smile. I talk to them sometimes, tell them about my grandchildren, about the world, about how much I miss them, and sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet and Margaret is sleeping and the candles are burning low, I could swear I hear them answering. Keep telling our stories, Jack, Tommy says. That's all we ever wanted, for someone to remember. I will, Tommy. I promise. I will. There's a park in our hometown now, a small memorial garden dedicated to the men from our county who didn't come home from the war. Their names are carved into a granite wall, and every Memorial Day, people come to lay flowers and flags. Tommy's name is there, Billy's too, and Hank's and Sammy's. I go there every year. I sit on a bench across from that wall, and I read the names, and I remember the faces behind them. Not just my 4 friends, but all of them. So many names, so many stories cut short. Last year, my great-granddaughter came with me. She's 12 years old, bright as a button, full of questions. She asked me what it was like being in the war. How could I explain it to a child who's never known anything but peace? I told her about the fear, the constant gnawing fear that lives in your gut and never fully goes away. I told her about the cold, the exhaustion, the hunger, but mostly I told her about the men I served with, about their courage, their kindness, their sacrifice. "Were you scared, Great-Grandpa?" she asked. "Every single day," I said. "Only a fool wouldn't be scared. But you know what? My friends were scared too, and we helped each other through it. That's what matters, not being brave enough to never feel afraid, but being brave enough to keep going, even when you're terrified." She thought about that for a while. Then she pointed to a name on the wall. "Thomas O'Brien," she read. "Who was he?" And so I told her about Tommy, about his red hair and his big laugh and his dreams of being a writer. I told her about his notebook, how he carried it everywhere, scribbling down observations that he was going to turn into the great American novel. "Did he ever write his book?" she asked. "I wrote it for him," I said. "After the war, it took me 20 years, but I finished it." "Can I read it?" I smiled. "When you're older, it's not an easy story, but someday, yes. I'd like you to read it. I'd like you to know who Tommy was, who all of them were." She nodded solemnly, with a gravity beyond her years, and in that moment I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope that their stories would live on, that the next generation, and the generation after that, would remember, would understand, would honor the sacrifice of young men who gave their lives for something bigger than themselves. I'm 101 years old. I've outlived everyone I served with, everyone I grew up with, almost everyone I've ever known. My Margaret passed away 15 years ago, and there's not a day that goes by that I don't miss her. But I keep going. I keep telling stories. I keep remembering. Because that's what survivors do. We carry the memories of the fallen. We speak their names. We make sure the world doesn't forget. Tommy O'Brien, Billy Santos, Hank Cooper, Samuel Washington, my brothers, my friends, my heroes. They didn't survive the attack that killed everyone around me. But as long as I'm alive, as long as I'm breathing, as long as I have a voice to tell their stories, they're not truly gone. And when my time finally comes, when I take my last breath and close my eyes for the last time, I know exactly who I'll see waiting for me. 4 men standing in a clearing that's no longer covered in blood but in wildflowers. Tommy with his notebook scribbling away, Billy with Rosa's picture smiling that quiet smile, Hank with his fists raised, ready to spar. Sammy with his voice lifted in song. "Took you long enough, Jack," Tommy will say, and I'll laugh. For the first time in 80 years, I'll laugh without tears. "I had stories to tell," I'll say. "Your stories. I had to make sure people remembered." And Tommy will close his notebook and nod. "They'll remember," he'll say. "Because of you, they'll remember." And finally, after all these years, I'll be home. Not in Millbrook, Pennsylvania, not in any place you could find on a map. Home with my brothers, home where I belong. Until then, I'll keep going, keep telling stories, keep honoring the men who gave everything so that others could live. My name is James Callahan. Most folks call me Jack. I was born in 1923, and I fought in the Second World War. I survived the attack that killed everyone around me, and this is my story, their story, our story, forever. The war ended in May of 1945, but for those of us who lived through it, it never really ended. We carried it with us, a weight that shaped every step we took for the rest of our lives. I came home to a world that wanted to celebrate, wanted to move on, wanted to forget. People thanked us for our service and then changed the subject. They didn't want to hear about the nightmares, the flashbacks, the guilt that gnawed at us in the quiet hours of the night. For a while, I tried to pretend everything was normal. I went back to work at the mill. I smiled when people asked how I was doing. I said I was fine. I wasn't fine. I was drinking too much, sleeping too little, and pushing away everyone who tried to get close. My mother noticed. She always noticed everything. One night she sat me down at the kitchen table, put a cup of coffee in front of me and said, "Talk to me, James. Tell me what you saw over there." And I did. For the first time since coming home, I opened up. I told her about Tommy and Billy and Hank and Sammy. I told her about the clearing in the Ardennes, about the machine guns and the mortars, about holding my friends as they died. I told her about the guilt, the crushing, suffocating guilt of being the one who survived. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she reached across the table and took my hands. "You didn't survive by accident, James," she said. "You survived for a reason. Maybe you don't know what that reason is yet, but someday you will, and until then, you just keep putting one foot in front of the other. You keep living for them." It was the advice I needed to hear. It didn't fix everything, not right away, but it gave me something to hold on to. A purpose. A reason to keep going. I met Margaret at a church social in 1947. She was a nurse, had served in a field hospital in England during the war. She understood things that civilian women couldn't. She'd seen the wounded soldiers come in, seen the light leave their eyes, seen the ones who survived carrying scars that went far deeper than the flesh. Our first conversation lasted 4 hours. We talked about everything and nothing, about the war and the peace and what we hoped the future would hold. By the end of the night, I knew she was the one. We got married in the spring of 1948, in the same little church where we'd met. It was a small ceremony, just family and a few close friends. But in my heart, there were 5 extra guests. Tommy and Billy and Hank and Sammy and me, the way we used to be, young and whole and full of hope. Margaret helped me heal, not completely, because some wounds never fully close, but enough. Enough to live, enough to love, enough to find joy in the midst of sorrow. We had our first child in 1949, a boy. We named him Thomas Henry, after Tommy and Hank. He had his mother's eyes and his father's stubborn streak, and from the moment I held him in my arms, I understood something I'd never understood before. This was why I survived. This was the reason, to bring new life into the world, to pass on the stories, to make sure the sacrifice of my friends meant something. We had 2 more children after Thomas. A daughter named Sarah and another son named William after Billy. They grew up hearing stories about the war, about the men their father had served with, about courage and sacrifice and brotherhood. I never lied to them about what war was really like. I didn't glorify it, didn't make it sound like an adventure, but I also didn't shield them from the truth. They needed to understand. They needed to know what their freedom had cost. The years passed. The children grew up, went to college, got married, had children of their own. The steel mill closed, the town changed, the world moved on, but some things stayed the same. Every December 16th, I lit those 5 candles. Every Memorial Day, I visited that wall of names. Every day in my heart, I carried my friends with me. I started writing Tommy's novel in 1960. It took me 2 decades to finish because I could only work on it in small doses. The memories were too raw, too painful to dwell on for long. But bit by bit, page by page, the story took shape. It's not a traditional war novel. It's not about battles and strategy and military operations. It's about 5 young men from different backgrounds who found each other in the chaos of training camp and became brothers. It's about their hopes, their fears, their dreams for the future. It's about what they fought for and what they lost. I sent the manuscript to publishers under Tommy's name, with a note explaining that he had been killed in the war and that I, his surviving friend, had finished the book based on his notes and observations. Most publishers rejected it. War stories were out of fashion by then. People wanted to look forward, not back. But finally, in 1982, a small press in Boston agreed to publish it. They printed 5,000 copies. It wasn't a bestseller. It didn't make any money. But it existed. Tommy's words, his observations, his way of seeing the world, they were out there for anyone who wanted to read them. His mother passed away before the book was published, but his sister was still alive, and I sent her a copy. She called me the day she finished reading it, crying so hard she could barely speak. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for giving him this, for giving us this." It was worth every year of struggle, every painful memory relived, every tear shed over the typewriter. Tommy would have been proud. The older I got, the more I felt the weight of being the last one. All the men I'd served with were gone now, taken by time if not by war. Their stories were fading, becoming footnotes in history books, statistics in documentary films. That's when I started giving talks at schools, at veterans organizations, at community centers and churches. I told my story, our story, to anyone who would listen. I showed them pictures of Tommy and Billy and Hank and Sammy. I read passages from Tommy's notebook. I made them real, made them human, not just names on a wall, but young men with dreams and fears and people who loved them. The children were always the best audiences. They asked the most honest questions, the ones adults were too polite to voice. "Were you scared?" they asked. "Did you ever want to give up? Do you still have nightmares?" "Yes," I told them. "Yes to all of it. And I keep going anyway, because that's what my friends would have wanted. That's what they died for, not just for freedom or democracy or any abstract ideal, but for the chance for future generations to live, to ask questions, to understand. When Margaret got sick, I thought it would break me. Cancer, the doctors said, inoperable. She had maybe 6 months. She lived for 2 more years, because Margaret was stubborn like that. She refused to go before she was ready. And in those 2 years, we said everything we needed to say. We laughed and cried and held each other through the long nights. We looked at photographs and remembered the life we'd built together. The night before she passed, she squeezed my hand and smiled. "I'll tell them you're coming," she said. "Tommy and Billy and Hank and Sammy, I'll tell them to wait for you." "Don't you dare rush me," I said through my tears. "I've still got stories to tell." She laughed, that beautiful laugh I'd fallen in love with 60 years earlier. "Then tell them, James. Tell them all. And when you're done, I'll be waiting." She closed her eyes and slipped away just as the sun was coming up, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. I sat with her until the nurse came, holding her hand, thanking her for everything she'd given me. That was 15 years ago. I'm still here, still telling stories. My children think I'm too old to live alone, and maybe they're right, but I'm stubborn, like Margaret, like all the men I served with. I'll go when I'm ready, and not a moment before. In the meantime, I wake up every morning and light a candle. I look at the photographs on my shelf, the faces of young men frozen in time, and I talk to them. "Good morning, boys," I say. "Still kicking over here? Just thought you should know." And I swear, sometimes I can hear Tommy laugh. The world is so different now from the one we fought to save. Technology I couldn't have imagined, communication across the globe in the blink of an eye, information at our fingertips. My great-grandchildren think it's hilarious that I still read newspapers, actual paper newspapers, every morning. But some things don't change. People still fall in love, still raise families, still hope for a better future. And people still fight, still kill, still wage wars for reasons that seem vital at the time and incomprehensible in hindsight. When I watch the news and see young soldiers in distant lands, I think of us. Young men barely out of childhood, thrown into circumstances no one should have to face. I pray for them. I pray they make it home. I pray they find the peace I've spent 80 years searching for, and I keep telling stories. Because stories are how we remember. Stories are how we honor. Stories are how we make sure that the sacrifice of Tommy O'Brien and Billy Santos and Hank Cooper and Samuel Washington was not in vain. They were my brothers. They saved my life more times than I can count. And when that clearing in the Ardennes turned into a slaughterhouse, when the bullets flew and the mortars fell and the world exploded into chaos, they died as they had lived. Together. I survived. I don't know why. I'll never know why. But I do know this. I've spent every day since trying to be worthy of their sacrifice, trying to live a life that honors their memory, trying to be the kind of man they would have been proud to call their friend. My name is James Callahan. Jack to my friends. I'm 101 years old, and I'm the last survivor of an attack that killed everyone around me. But in my heart, I'm not alone. I never have been. Tommy and Billy and Hank and Sammy are with me, in my memories, in my stories. In the candles I light every December 16th, they live on. And as long as I'm breathing, as long as anyone is listening, they always will. This is not just my story. This is their story. This is America's story. This is the story of every young person who has ever been called to sacrifice everything for something greater than themselves. Remember them, honor them, tell their stories, because they matter. Their lives matter. Their deaths matter. And forgetting them would be the greatest tragedy of all. So the next time you pass a war memorial, stop for a moment. Read the names. Think about the faces behind them, the dreams they never got to fulfill, the families they left behind, and say thank you. It's the least we can do. For Tommy, for Billy, for Hank, for Sammy, for all of them. Forever remembered, forever honored, forever loved. That's my story. That's their story. And now it's yours too. Carry it with you. Pass it on. Make sure the world never forgets, because as long as we remember, they're never truly gone. They're right here with us, always.